Ladies and gentlemen, it's Monday. It's the holidays. I hope everybody has caught a little bit of that Christmas spirit. Sometimes it can be tough during the holidays. If you're having a tough time and you're listening to this, guess what? I love you. I hope you have a beautiful Christmas, and I hope a little miracle happens to you. I hope the sun is shining or there's a silver lining. And I hope that this show can be a silver lining or a beam of sunshine for whoever's listening or watching or whoever's here today with this True Live community. I have a cool, incredible, and insightful guest who's got a passion for helping people today. I want everyone to meet Nicole Runyon. She's a compassionate licensed master social worker in Michigan, dedicated since 2003 to supporting children and adolescents in the digital age. With over 4,000 hours of clinical experience, Nicole specializes in the intersection of parenting, technology, and cultural influences on mental health, continuously updating her expertise with 45 hours of education every 3 years. Nicole is committed to staying current with evolving treatment methodologies. Her educational journey includes a psychology degree from the University of Michigan and a Master of Social Work from Wayne State University in 2003. Nicole is a beacon of support for individuals, couples, and families navigating life's challenges in the digital era. Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's what an interesting time we live in, right?
Absolutely. What should we talk about first?
Well, maybe maybe a little bit of a backstory. I've always found that people who are looking for ways to help children and adolescents in some ways seem to be maybe helping themselves a little bit. Maybe you can give us just a short little backstory of how you got to be so passionate about what you're doing.
Sure. I have been practicing for 20 years, seeing kids the whole time. And, that's really where my heart is because I think the kids are essentially our future. And if we can sort of get to them before they become wounded adults, then we could change the world, literally. So, what I noticed in the past 10 years um, with the kids is a really huge sort of shift in their mental health. And what I was seeing a lot of is kids who were presenting with some really major mental health issues with no root in any kind of psychosocial reason. So, what that means is what I was seeing in front of me in my office was not from trauma, was not from neglect, was not from anything that outwardly or based on the parents' reports that I could see causing such severity in the symptoms. So I really kind of went down this road of, and I'm a dot connector. I always want to know why things
Yeah.
are. So I went down this road of trying to ask myself and figure out why am I seeing such severity with no root in anything psychosocial? And I over the last 10 years, I've kind of developed about 8 different explanations with a heavy focus on technology and how it's affecting their development, and coupled with what I call the culture of parenting. And, parents today, of course, are well meaning and loving and wonderful. But what's happening is we're parenting out of our wounds. So we have our childhoods, which are one end of the pendulum, and then the pendulum swings really far in the other direction. And what's happening overall is that the parents aren't allowing their kids to be uncomfortable or deal with disappointment or anything hard. So what we're seeing with the kids is a lot of what looks like trauma because they aren't being taught to be independent. They aren't being taught to cope and deal with their feelings. And then on top of it, we're putting a device in their hands that's making their dopamine surge every day. Many of them constantly because they're on their phones constantly. So there's 2 factors put together are really causing a major chaotic mess for kids today.
It sounds like generational trauma plus technological innovation equals traumatic experience.
100%. With then a lack of understanding of how the family
Yeah,
system works,
right.
and a lack of understanding that parents really have the power to make the change. Because then what's happening is they're flooding the mental health system with kids needing therapy, with kids, going to psychiatrists and getting medication, and it's not working. And in fact, it's kind of making things worse because the mental health system is now overloaded with kids that are just not getting the right kind of help or treatment.
And we spoke a little bit about parenting out of a wound. is a big part of this crisis because of maybe the parenting generation that maybe they never got help? Is that to the idea of generational trauma?
Absolutely. So if you look at just right now, like Gen X is mainly
Mhm.
raising Gen Z,
Right.
right? Gen X is the forgotten about generation, the neglected generation, right? I think you look like a Gen
Here, here.
Xer. I am too. And so in some ways, most of us Gen Xers are a little bit nostalgic of a time when kids had independence, right? Because we
Yeah.
recognize that was really good for us. The thing with Gen X, though, is that our emotional needs weren't being met either. So it's good to give the kids the independence like we had, but we have to couple it with caring about their feelings and being concerned about their developmental needs. And so because us Gen Xers were on that extreme where we were fully neglected, okay, we have swung the pendulum too far in the overindulgent direction, right? And
Yeah.
that's the parenting out of our wound. So Gen Z, we all know what's going on with Gen Z, right? They're not all right overall, and now they're entering in the workforce and they're really struggling. And people working with them are really struggling to work with them because they're very fragile. They're often offended by the smallest of things, and the world or the real world really shouldn't be or can't overcorrect what was missing in childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's when I think of Generation X and like my kids or whatever, and I take an honest look at my flaws, like there's a lot of misplaced anger in that, like especially towards authority. Like maybe that's the way I grew up or whatever, but it seems to be with my Gen X friends, like they're like, you know what, these boomers, forget about them, like. And I'm just wondering, is that something that people are seeing in the workplace with Gen Z? Is maybe maybe the fragile is a sort of misplaced anger?
I think that is a really insightful way to put it. I think because we were so neglected
Yeah.
by the authority figures, by the people that were supposed to be caring for us. So you're right. There's this rejection of that we trickle down onto our kids, right? You don't have to respect your teachers. You don't have to, listen to your coach. And sometimes that's appropriate, right? It's always good to kind of push back on authority and resist a little bit, but not to that extreme.
Spoken like a true Xer.
Right?
I love it. I love it. Let me ask you this. So, in your experience, like what specific challenges do children from the I generation face in their mental health and overall development due to technology?
Yep. So what technology is doing is every developmental stage requires some discomfort and some pain to grow. So like that cliche growing pains, right?
Right.
And so what technology is doing is it's preventing from the discomfort because it gives such a huge dopamine surge. It allows you to avoid doing hard things. I always like to point out, I mean, we all know the research is out. We all know social media is bad for you, right?
Right.
So I like to kind of dig even deeper and point out benign things like the weather app, for example, and talk about how it really impedes on children's critical thinking skills or the development of. So cognitively, kids go through a big growth spurt at 7. They start to become concrete and more conscious of things.
Yeah.
And so we really, at that point in their development, we want to give them lots of mind challenges and critical thinking exercises. And so if kids at that age have an iPad or they grab their parent's phone and they go and they click on the weather to give them an idea of what the day is going to be like and how they should dress, then they're not using that cognitive ability.
Right.
And so it's impeding on that. So I like to bring that up as something to really critically think about. Because like I said, we all know, yeah, video games aren't good. Social media isn't good. But have we really thought about what every piece of having a device, how it affects them along the way in their development?
Yeah, it echoes back to the Socratic dialogues. In the story Timaeus, they tell a story about the inventor of writing and how he's so excited about this new technology. Like, great master, I have made this new technology called writing, and it's going to help the humankind so much. And then the leader says, actually it's going to make them worse, because now people will have the ability to hear about a story, but they'll never have the lived experience. And basically that idea is atrophying the same way that when people look at a weather app, instead of going outside and being like, okay, the clouds are up there, it might be a shower, but it doesn't look like it's going to stay. Now they just look at that app, and when they go outside, how come it's not raining anymore? It's an interesting idea of atrophy and critical thinking. I never thought about it. That's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, and if you think about it, I get frustrated because people will cancel things based on the weather report before
Totally.
they even know what it's gonna
Yeah.
be, and then it turns out I had a situation a couple years ago where I was planning an outdoor summer pool party with a
Mhm.
big group of people, and somebody had texted the group, "Oh, it looks like it's gonna rain, we should change the date." And we went back and forth and back and forth, and finally I just said, "All right, let's change the date." Well,
Mhm.
what do you know, I woke up that morning, the sun was shining, it was beautiful, and I texted everyone and I said, "Well, I'm up for it if you all are." And for the most part, everyone showed up. A couple of people had already made alternative plans, but you think about that and it's like, why are we're so preemptive to listen to something outside of ourselves?
It is interesting. So I have another question that I want to ask you, and I just was thinking about this as we were talking. I'm wondering if maybe social media, I know that the environment may play a factor, but as someone who's a professional in this, it seems to me that like girls as young as 4 are beginning to get, like, not 4, I'm sorry, girls in the 4th grade are like beginning to get their period. And it just seems like, is that a function? Do you think that like social media on some level, the way it changes the way kids are developing, maybe the dopamine, maybe the change in their brain? Do you think there might be some sort of ties to a woman developing earlier at that age, like in 4th grade, that could be applied to the whole social media thing?
I think, well, I think actually, I talk a little bit about overall physical development
Okay.
and health related to the food.
Yeah.
Because our food is so highly processed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hormone disruptors in it, and so I think that's what's causing young girls to get their periods younger and younger. But to your point, I think coupled with, so you've got the food and the technology. If
Yeah.
you add social media into that, then their brains are growing faster than they should, right? Because they know
Mm,
more about older adult things than they
right.
should, and their maturity gets a little bit muffled, actually a lot muffled, because they know things, but emotionally
Yeah.
they're still young. And 4th grade is a real important age because at 9, the child goes through a big social emotional development where they become conscious of themselves as individuals outside of their family. Prior to 9, the family is the center of the child's universe. And so what happens then is they have one foot in early childhood and one foot in adolescence. And it's a very tumultuous, can be a very emotional time. So, yes, if they're being exposed to social media and their maturity is, they're learning more about adult things,
Mm,
then that really enhances the confusion of the 9-year change. So the food, the screens, and the parenting are all changing the development, and affecting essentially the terrain
yeah.
of the child.
It's amazing to think about the different wheels of complexity all turning at different rates that are causing the machine or you know what? I want to apologize. I should not use a mechanistic machine for a human being. I'm sorry, everybody. I shouldn't do that. That's horrible. So, long story longer, as we stay around the 9 age or we think about kids in grade school, when COVID came, there was this incredible transition where people were learning online. And I know that I had a younger daughter at that time, and it was very interesting to get to see a teacher with great intentions and who was a great person trying to give the class online to kids as young as 2nd graders. Is there any data on how that may have affected kids, or are we still kind of sorting through that? Or what's your opinion on that distance learning for children?
Yeah, I think I think the data is out, and I don't have like a study to refer to, but I do know that overall we have learned that it did not do the kids very well. They're all still affected by it because um, the lack of in-person
Mm,
interaction, social emotional learning at every age, at every developmental stage, really put them behind. So there was absolutely learning loss. Lots of teachers have reported that and still are reporting that. But there was also, I see in my practice, a loss of that social emotional development. An example of this is the last year and this year, I had gotten more calls from parents of kids in the first grade and now a second grade. So last year's first graders, this year's second graders, for social issues at recess. And I put the pieces together and realized it's because those kids were in preschool during the lockdowns. And preschool is exactly the time that we should be doing social emotional learning. And so what was happening on the playground with first and second graders is stuff that they should have learned back in preschool and they didn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to think about the verbal, not only the verbal cues, but like the facial cues, like the felt presence of the other that is really, you know, part of the substance of understanding relationships in some ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, call it what it is, but when the kids were coming back into the buildings and everybody was masked up, I was not okay with that because I think kids need to see facial expression and body language, and they need to be able to, interact in that way, especially young kids developing their speech. They need
Mm.
to see the mouth moving and, see all of that. That's so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, most of us can think back to a stern look we got from our teacher that meant to be quiet, and if you don't have that for a while, especially in those formative years, if you start missing these, if you miss the stern look from an angry person, you may miss the beautiful sly smile of a loved one,
Mhm.
and it's like these are precious moments that allow us to understand how to proceed in relationships, or when we're treading on thin ice, or when we're maybe making the mark, or it's interesting to think about language and communication on that level and how it can definitely affect us.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, given your specialization, what advice do you offer parents to navigate the complexities of raising children in an era that's dominated by technology?
This is always a tricky one, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so, unique to the family and
Yeah.
the situation. I can say all day long, "Listen, I don't think any kid should have a smart device until they're 14." And really, I mean, ideally 18, but nowadays, I tend to say if somebody really wants an age, I say 14. Well, that's not realistic, I think, in some families that have already opened up Pandora's box, right? So if that's the case, if you don't have little ones where you can maybe just delay usage as much as possible, I think it's all about connection. So however you can get a connection with your child, that's how you navigate the screens. So what that means is, can you as a family agree to have family dinner time screen free where everyone is talking and sharing their day and giving eye contact and connecting on that level? Can you as a family agree to cut off technology at a certain time of the night? There's all these sort of rituals and practices that a family with technology really needs to participate in and be aware of. And again, different for every family, but essentially it's all about the connection.
Yeah, I like that. It's a it harkens back to the idea of communication we were talking about, and those facial cues and understanding. And uh, another one we tell our daughter too is that we do those things. We definitely have dinner, and we have cutoff times. We have like limits for screen time where the phone will just shut off and you can't use it.
Mhm.
But I think something else that people could do that may help is what we do is, if you're going to use it, I prefer that you create something instead of consume something. At least that way you're interacting on a level that is not consumptive. And I think that you are not, while you still could be getting dopamine by creating, either making your own video or creating a voice memo or making art, at least that way the stimulus reward is somewhat on a better path than just being full stimulation and passive right there. So
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. I've noticed that since I've really been talking about this and putting myself out there more online, that it has a different feel
yeah.
than just being on a device all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm creating and I'm sort of sharing something that I think is big and important. So I like that way of showing the kids that, this stuff could be good if you use it
Right.
the right way.
Right.
But when it came on the scene, we gave kids unfettered access, thinking it's fine, and it's just frankly been damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to work with, maybe do like a class on something where, instead of, and we could change the language. Instead of like consuming social media, it could be co-creating with social media.
Mm.
That might steer people in the right direction. And I love what you said about creation, because that brings up a whole avenue of things for kids to explore. Oh, you're creating this thing. So you're working with this tool to create it. And then that way it gives you more of the authority to have over it. Instead of it controlling you, you control it. But I think if you begin to lay that foundation down, it might be helpful in some ways. I'll have to revisit that. It sounds pretty interesting, though.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why I like the idea of delayed usage, because the
Nice.
older the kid is, the more mature and able they are to hear that message, and to learn how to have a balance. Because yes, the reality is that they're going to grow up and they're going to have this stuff in their lives, and it's important for us parents to teach them how to be appropriate with it. And the older they are and the more mature they are, the more they're going to be able to hear that message without getting too excited with it and overdoing it.
Yeah, I agree. It's well said. In your opinion, how has the increased use of digital devices influenced the dynamics of family relationships, and what strategy do you recommend for maintaining healthy connections?
Mhm. I think it's certainly disconnected us. I've heard parent after parent after parent say, the day I got the game system or the day I gave them the smartphone was the day that, we stopped being close.
Mm,
It really literally just is in the way of human interaction, even just physically. We can all look around. I often will sit in a waiting room with my kids, whether it's a doctor's appointment or something like that, and I intentionally don't have my phone, and they often don't want to talk to me, right? Because there's other people around, and they're uncomfortable with that. But I'll just sit with them in silence while I watch everybody else scroll
mhm.
on their phone, parents and kids. And when you see it, it's almost like you're the only sober person in the room and everyone else is drunk,
Yeah.
When you see it, it's so clear how disconnecting it is. I mean, literally all of your attention and focus and your energy is in this device and not in the outside world. So yeah, how it's affected families, it's disconnecting. And then because it's disconnecting, it prevents from conflict resolution and talking things out and learning how to communicate, and even just basic things like families who don't even talk about like their weekly schedule, and then the day comes and everybody's all hurried and doesn't know where they're going and doesn't know the schedule, and then fighting about everything. So, how I recommend staying connected is by being intentional about your time and how you're spending it. I have a teenage son myself, and I will often, if I notice that he's been on his phone too much, I will often just sit him down and say, "Listen, your phone is a relationship. The time you're putting into your phone is a relationship, and we, your family, are also a relationship. So, what is the most important relationship to you? Your relationship to your device or your relationship to your family?" And I don't tell him what the answer is. I think that answer is obvious, and he knows it, because he appreciates time with us. So that will help him be aware and think about how he's spending his time and what that means for him. And he has made some really good choices about technology when I put it to him that way, instead of what most parents do. And I've been guilty of this. You're on your phone too much. Put it down. That's just them hearing a demand from you, and they're going to reject it. So to put it to them in that way of like, this is a relationship. You really have to think about that. What are you choosing when you spend so much time on your device?
That's really well put. I like that. I'm gonna incorporate that into my strategy. I like
Yeah.
that.
It works because I have a very hard-headed, stubborn, strong-willed, powerful child,
Nice.
which I think is great. I love that about him, and I think he's gonna it's going to make for a great adult, but it's hard to parent. And so I've had to learn, he's taught me that I have to present things in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting how being a parent on some level makes you a student, maybe
Mhm.
more so than when you were a student.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I know why. When I first started doing this work, parents, would ask me, "You look really young. Do you have kids of your own?" And I didn't, and they didn't like that very much.
Mhm.
And now I know why.
Yeah.
Because it's made me a better therapist. It's made me a better parent coach, and certainly, him teaching me has made me a better parent.
The most frustrating thing is when I see my daughter do something that I do, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's what I do. Oh, that's what I look like right there. I gotta change that," you
Oh, I
know?
got to change that. Yeah. It's like looking in the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter has a really good she's perfected her eye roll, and that's hands down because of me.
That's
I'm a
so
good eye
funny.
roller.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that. And then you start thinking, okay, this got me in trouble these 25 times. If I don't fix that, they're going to get in trouble those 25 times, maybe more. And then that really leads to this idea of, you can tell your kids something till you're blue in the face, but if you act upon it the opposite way, that's the lesson you're teaching them. And that can be very difficult for parents. Like maybe something recently that happened with me is that I was at a job that I'd done it for 26 years. I was dying in there. Like literally, I couldn't do it. So much misplaced anger. And I was always telling my daughter, look, you have to live for yourself and do the right thing. But I would go do this job that I hated all the time.
Mm.
And it was like, okay, I got to this point where I'm like, I have to not do this. Otherwise my daughter's going to do it. But I guess the point is, if you can come to the realization that your actions as a parent speak louder than your words, it can be the catalyst for you to make profound changes in your life.
100%. That is so true. And how powerful is that? Yeah.
I don't know if there's words for it.
No. No. It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's mesmerizing to me. Can you maybe discuss some successful interventions or strategies you've employed to address the mental health challenges specific to the I generation in your clinical work?
Mhm. Yeah. So what I've done actually is completely shift from doing psychotherapy with children to coaching parents.
Mm.
And what a profound change that has made on the children. Because what I was learning was that pathologizing the child, putting the problem on the child for an overall macro cultural problem was making it worse. And then I applied that to our mental health system and how our ERs are overloaded with children in mental health cases. They're not equipped to deal with them. There's nowhere for these kids to go. There's not enough facilities. There's not enough therapists. And I thought, we really are approaching this the wrong way because putting the onus on the child. Now, I'm all about personal responsibility. So what I mean by putting the onus on them is putting a diagnosis on them and scapegoating that they're the problem. They're the ones with the illness. Is just hands down making everything worse because it's making them feel like victims.
Mm.
Instead of having the parents model that we can own the changes we need to make, like you just said, how powerful is that?
Makes
And
me wanna cry.
neither one of us really followed anything up with that because we realized just that is enough. So if you put the power in the hands of the parents to make the changes, then that gives the children the power to feel like they can make the necessary changes in their lives and they're not victims. And then we don't see mental health issues. We don't see anxiety. We don't see panic disorder. We don't see OCD. There's so much of that right now. And so I often don't really need to meet with the parents much. My marketing experts are telling me I need to offer coaching packages, for 6 months. And I'm really trying to figure that out because the parents don't need 6 months. They really only need a couple sessions, to hear, hey, this change needs to be made, this change needs to be made, and they're good to go and the families are thriving.
I've spoken to multiple people about generational trauma, but I want to say thank you. I've never had that particular lens on it, but it makes total sense. Like that's what we do. And, that's probably what our parents did to us. And all of a sudden you realize it's not the child that's panicking. It's the parents. Like, they're scared. They're fearful. They don't know how to move through the world because they were never taught. And so of course they're going to push it off on their kid. It must be the kid's fault, or I just can't deal with this right now. So, wow, when was it that you came upon that realization?
I would say during the lockdowns, because, well, I'm in Michigan and we were locked down more than any other state. I think it was like Michigan, California, New York. We were all kind of neck and neck with how long we were locked down. And just my community and the mental health of everybody around me was just deteriorating. And I started to really look at, well, first of all, I actually ended up with like physical adrenal fatigue issues because I was working so much, because there was so much need. And so it really made me take stock in, how can I continue to do this work? Because this work is, I've known I wanted to do it since I was 10 years old. I wasn't walking away from the work. There was no way. And so I had to ask myself, how can I continue to do this sustainably? And I knew I had to change my methods because they literally weren't working. So I had to put my ego aside and ask myself, like, what really needs to happen? And this whole time I've done this work, I've known that it's the parents that need the help. But the problem with psychotherapy with children is, for the child's your client. So first you have to build the rapport with the child to then get them to trust you to then meet with their parents, so they don't feel like you're talking about them behind their back to their parents. Then I have to work to gain the rapport of the parents, for them to trust me, for me to tell them, hey, essentially, you're making some mistakes. You need to make some changes, right? Well, that takes at least a year. That whole process I'm describing takes at least a year. So what I was finding is if people had the tolerance to stay with me long enough, maybe they got better, but it took about 2 to 3 years. If most of them didn't have the tolerance to stay with that process, so they would just walk away and leave, and I was left feeling like I failed them. And that was unacceptable to me because this work is so important. And so I really had to ask myself, how can I get these people better faster? How can I get these kids better faster? And I realized I got to go right to the parents, hands down, right to the parents. So in the first phone call, I still get phone calls for therapy because I'm just getting started marketing myself as a parent coach, and I'm speaking and writing. So I still get the psychotherapy calls, but within the first call, I say, listen, I'm not open. My practice isn't open to psychotherapy anymore. I will do this and I will meet with you. And I explain the whole process. And if they agree to it, if they show up and sit across from me, then they see how fast things can get better. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a process. But for me, the lockdowns were a huge wake-up call.
Yeah, I think it was while tragic in a lot of ways, I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people to question who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, is it working? How much money do you need? And it's interesting to think about all the quick, the rapid realization that happened there, whether it was magic or tragic for some people. I think it changed a lot of people's lives, and it's interesting to think. Well, in your clinical practice, what trends have you observed regarding the impact of social media and self-esteem and social interactions of adolescents?
Yeah. I think so. When I was a teenager, it was Teen Magazine and Vogue and 17 Magazine, and all the models were airbrushed, and we all knew it, but we all sort of wanted to look like them and felt bad about ourselves for not. But so that was damaging enough, right, for girls. Um, but but that was, we all knew they were supermodels, right? So
Right.
so like we all knew that, okay, well, I'm only 5 feet tall, so I'm never going to be a supermodel.
Right.
And I could accept that. And I could choose, eventually I did. I told my mom to stop subscribing to the magazines because I knew it was damaging me so much. So it was pretty easy. You could cancel your subscription and maybe you'd see it on the shelf at the grocery store, but it's not going to be in your face every day. So social media is so much more damaging than that because we can filter ourselves. So if your girlfriend posts a picture of herself that makes her look like a supermodel, then even though there's probably filters on that, you then have to you look at yourself because that's your friend and you can relate more to her. She's not a supermodel and she looks like that. So then it becomes this pressure to constantly be taking pictures of yourself and filtering them and getting them to be just right and perfect. And it really essentially can become an obsession. I've seen girls who really don't do much to their appearance in like in the real world. They'll show up to school all disheveled or they'll show up to work all disheveled. But then when they're going on social media, they'll get themselves all dolled up because that's real to them. Whereas this real world stuff, like what's real to you and me, isn't real to them.
What an interesting phenomenon to model reality. Like, what happens when your online life is more real than your other life? It's so strange, right?
Yeah, it's very strange. And really what happens is you become depressed in your real life because you don't know how to cope or deal with anything. And that's what we're seeing. There's a direct correlation, thanks to Jean Twang. We now have research where there's a correlation between social media and depression and suicidal outcomes. And what she found is that the suicide rate in both boys and girls has increased since social media came on the scene. Now, I think overall girls are being more affected by it, but it certainly is affecting boys as well. And on the end of boys, it's the relationships. The male female relationships are getting very toxic, and so boys are engaging in these really unhealthy relationships with girls, um, and don't know how to cope, and are often suicidal because of it.
Yeah, that seems like that may go all the way back to the beginning of our discussion. Like when you don't learn relationships in kindergarten, being rough and tumble or being playing with blocks. Blocks is a great metaphor. If you don't learn to play with blocks as a kid, how can you build anything when later, especially a relationship, especially if you have like porn on one side and these filters on the other side. It's just this giant abstraction. And then you get together and you're like, this is not what it looks like on TV. It's it's kind of heartbreaking.
It is. It's become a perfect storm. So when I first, like I said, about 10 years ago, I first noticed all this stuff with the kids. I blamed the technology. I'm like, oh, it's just the technology. It's just the technology. And then over time, I've come to this conclusion that it's a perfect storm. It's the parents that don't give the kids the tools and the disappointment earlier on and the hardships earlier on. If your 3-year-old isn't tying their shoes, then by the time they're 16 and thinking about driving, they're not going to want to drive because they didn't go through building their tolerance for difficult developmental milestones. So that, coupled with the technology, has created this storm of really a lack of just being able to cope, and that's why the kids are overall not all right.
You think on some level, like the same way you were able to look at 17 magazine and be like, you know what, this is ridiculous, no more. Do you think that sort of, you know, can become something that happens to society? It seems like when something becomes flooded, then we build a resistance to it. Do you think that can happen?
Absolutely. I think it already is happening a little bit. We have little pockets of kids choosing not to be on social media. I know there's a friend of mine in my community whose teenage daughter and her friends have all made a pact not to be on it. There is a girl in New York who started a club called the Luddite Club.
Yeah, I like her already.
Yeah. And, they're just a bunch of kids that get together and they do in-person activities without devices. And it actually made national news. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that can happen. I always say, unfortunately, people have to experience pain before they make a change. And I hate that we've had to see our kids go through so much pain. But yeah, I think the pendulum has to go in the other direction at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, on some level, this birth of social media, the birth of the relation between social media and dopamine, and this sort of interesting paradigm. You could see the kids coming up that were affected by it, maybe getting the reins of power. And those are the people that maybe start to put the brakes on it a little bit, like, this was horrible. We got to change this. It seems to be hopefully a correcting sort of wave that comes up and changes that. I
Yeah.
wonder, are you aware of any studies, or have you seen, maybe through your experience, like, is the divorce rate, and I know there's a lot of moving parts here, but I'm wondering what the success of relationships are with the explosion of technology versus not having the technology.
Yeah. I don't know the data on that, but I certainly know that, in my practice alone, I hear couples. So when I coach the parents, inevitably, stuff about the two of them comes up. And often couples will point the finger at the other one. Have you heard
Yeah,
this?
of
She
course.
uses her phone too much. No, you use your phone too much. So absolutely, couples are affected by this. And I think most of us aren't even aware of how much we're on our devices. So
Yeah.
so oftentimes, the other person in the coupleship will have to point it out. Like, hey, you know what? You're on your phone too much. And there's also that image going around. I don't know if you've seen it, but where it's the couples in bed and they're facing the other way, and there's looks like there's a device in their hand, but there isn't one.
I haven't
Have
seen
you
that.
seen
No,
that?
no, I'll look
Oh,
for it though.
it's very powerful because they're staring, at their hand like this, but there's no device in it, and they're turned opposite ways.
Mm,
So
wow.
essentially, they're separate for no reason.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Is a powerful picture. It speaks volumes of our attitude towards things that get in between us. It used
Mhm.
to be, sometimes you didn't even need a phone. You just needed a bad idea, or I don't know. Yeah, it's mind blowing. I can't wait to investigate it a little bit more.
Yeah.
How has your background in studying women's issues influenced your perspective on the role of technology in shaping gender identity and expectations among children?
Um, I think that, um, women are the fabric of the family. They're the center of the family. And I think overall, moms feel very overwhelmed, very burnt out. They feel the burden of, balancing work and home life.
Yeah.
And I often see moms sort of checking out and giving up because they feel like they're failing. Their families aren't intact, things aren't well, their kids aren't well, and they feel desperate. They don't know what to do. And I think they're often, there's a modality now to check out, and that's social media. And I think overall they're on social media. It's why I think there's so much now. There's really a huge community around helping parents, helping moms. There's parenting books, there's podcasts. I think moms are feeling like they really need a lot of help.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we can begin to change that, because without mom at home, or without a woman having a strong sense of how powerful and important she is, the family disintegrates.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I don't think moms are yet feeling successful being the emotional center, because their kids are everyone's disconnected and they don't feel like they have a lot of power over that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've spoken a little bit about, like, filters on people, on young men or young women, and how that can change the perception of what someone looks like. But there's a similar filter on social media about what success looks like. And it's just this unrealistic expectation of, I don't know anybody that has that, but here they are. They got perfectly white teeth, and they have those fake body, like, they're just so fake. Sometimes I see them on TV, I'm like, that looks like the Barbie movie to me.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
watching stuff like, that's totally the Barbie movie, but it's not. I'm like, it's so hard to, like, even for me, I'm like, is that even real? I don't even know that's a real thing.
That's right. Yeah. You don't know. You don't know what's real. But, the thing with moms is that we're just more and more isolated from each other.
Yeah.
There used to be a time where moms raised the children together. There was a community, there was a connection. And now it's the mom wars, right? Do you work? Do you stay home? Do you
Mm,
breastfeed? Do you formula feed? And everyone's, criticizing each other, and everyone's wrong no matter what they do. And so yeah, of course, mom feels isolated, alone, like she's failing all the time because there's no sense of community around motherhood anymore.
man.
Yeah, I had this experience a few years ago. My husband and I joke we have this cookbook, and we love it, and the recipes are really beautiful and they're really good. But the maker of the cookbook will say recipe takes 20 minutes when really it's 2 hours. So we'll always say, he'll say, "Oh, I think we need a Heather Christo recipe this week," and I'll say, "Do you have 2 hours to be in the kitchen? Because I don't." And so I made this Heather Christo recipe one day, and it was beautiful. But the whole time, and this was my kids were little, they were younger, and the whole time I was stressed out because my daughter was crying and wanted my attention, and I was trying to finish this meal, and you have to get everything, you have to time everything right, and so I finished it. I, put it on a plate, and I thought to myself, if I were on social media, I would take a picture of this, I would post
Yeah.
it, and it would look like I am the world's greatest mother and that I have it all together, when really putting this together like nearly killed me and sent me into a nervous breakdown. And so there it is right there. You see what you see as a facade. It's not real, and you don't know what's behind that. You don't know what kind of stress it took for that mom to dress her kids all perfectly and get them all to look at the camera and smile.
I've seen a sort of a shift that's been happening where people are building online and they're beginning to show more vulnerability. Like I've seen some videos where people are showing like, this is my life. You look at it, and you're like, oh my gosh. But then you realize that's your life too. Do you think that maybe a shift in that kind of content of people being honest about like, this is what's really happening in my life? You think that could make a change in the way people perceive themselves and the culture?
I think somewhat. I think I caution people into going too far into the other direction, right, where they're like
Right.
looking for support,
Right.
because that's what I've seen a lot of, that where you post something that's really emotional and
Mm,
vulnerable, and then you don't get the support you need, and so you feel even more raw and vulnerable
mhm.
because you put something out there and you didn't get what you needed.
Yeah, or maybe even you start getting dopamine for posting content that's sad. You know what I mean? Then now you train your brain to get dopamine from being that way. That could be probably a disaster too.
Exactly, and then you get attention for
Right.
being sad, and then it increases your need and your want to keep posting things like that.
Mhm.
So, I just think really what it comes down to is human connection in the real world, because you're gonna be more authentic and real, and you're gonna, be able to express and communicate a bad day, and you're gonna be able to celebrate a good day, and you can go through the ups and downs kind of more in a natural, normal way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great advice. Well, we're kind of coming up on the top of the hour. I know you've been gracious with your time, but maybe before we go, you could just give us sort of some closing thoughts on what are some real things that people could begin today that may help them with their working with their children and technology.
So, I would suggest starting, just bringing awareness more to your body. I think we are so out of our bodies most of the time. We're in our minds, we're spinning, we're overanalyzing. So I think people need to sort of, not from the top down, because we always think of it like
Mhm.
it's the top down. It's really more from the bottom up. So ground your feet, take your shoes off, put them in the grass. I mean, you're in Hawaii, you can do that any time of year. I can't do that right now, but I can certainly be barefoot in my house on the wood floor, some kind of, um, you know, uh, uh, earth grounding. And anyone can do that anywhere, anytime. And just start there. Start with just being in your body, because once you're in your body, we're sensing beings, we're energetic beings. So when we can sense and we can feel ourselves, then we have access to other people. And then making choices around technology really almost becomes pretty easy because we can sense that we need time without it. And then we can sense that the people around us need us to be connected so they can connect as well.
Yeah, I like that. That's great advice to begin doing it. It's something some people can do today, and you can get in that right frame of mind to help you becoming aware. And once you have awareness, then you can begin to take the necessary steps to change things. It's wonderful. Nicole, this is what happens. Time goes by like that when I start talking to really interesting people. It's like boom, hour gone.
That's how I
So
feel too. This
I
was a
know.
great conversation, and I can't believe we're already done.
I know. I know. You have to come back because I think we just scratched the surface of it. And I think it's something that a lot of us, especially the demographics of Xers and, probably even some of the older generation and even the younger generation that are finding themselves wrapped up in this relationship are struggling with. And I think sometimes it's our struggles and it's the things that might even be traumatic about our lives that bring us together. So I love having these conversations because I think it's things we can rally around and we can work together to solve. And so, but before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you have coming up and what are you excited about?
Sure. Yep. I am on Instagram at iGeneration Mental Health. I'm also on Facebook under that same handle. As you know, I'm on LinkedIn, Nicole Runyon. And I do have a website, NicoleRunyon.com. It is in the middle of being transitioned from being a psychotherapist to more speaking and coaching. So, really, what I'm up to now is doing more speaking events where I talk to parents, to larger audiences of parents, and sort of educate them and help them understand what's happening with their kids and what they can do to help assist them and support them.
Well, fantastic. I love it. And I love the shifting of focus to the parents and still working with children, but shifting the focus to parents. I think that's beautiful. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it. But we'll hang on briefly afterwards. I'll talk to you just shortly afterwards. But to everybody who got to hang out with us today, I really appreciate your time. Hope you're having a beautiful day. And that's all we got for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha.